great question. So being a lender that has facilitated thousands of mortgages, a default is an eventuality, and it's something that is definitely an aspect of the business that we work to mitigate, but will inevitably happen. So the impact of a default is different in the direct mortgage program versus the MIC program. So first, let me describe what happens in the scenario of a direct mortgage investment. Actually, even before we do that, I'd like to distinguish the difference between a risk of default and risk of loss, because this pertains to both programs. So risk of default, this is an estimate. This is looking at the profile of the borrower, the scenario, the use of the funds, and us making our best guess using some metrics, but also some kind of gut feel of our underwriters. What are the chances that this borrower is going to default, right? That is a secondary concern. The primary thing that we're underwriting against is really the risk of loss. A risk of loss is what happens if not only the borrower defaults, but the property doesn't sell for the value that's sufficient to recover the principal. And if I'm going to be completely blunt, we don't really care. We primarily care about avoiding risk of loss. We'd like to avoid risk of default because it's going to be easier to manage. It's headaches we don't want to deal with. It's some stress for you and us as a team. But really, if we can avoid risk of loss, then we've done our job. So back to what happens if a borrower defaults. So the most common reason that somebody is going to be under default on their mortgage is due to missed payments. So as I said, every month we collect our monthly payments from investors. If any of those payments are returned, either the bank account had insufficient funds, or the bank account was closed, or there's any other issue with the payment, we're going to start our collections protocol. So we don't consider the mortgage in default immediately on missed payment. We'll typically give the borrower and ask the investor to provide a 30-day grace period. So give us that 30 days to go through our process. And we'll go through our sequence of calls and emails that is typically successful. Typically 90% of those late payments or missed payments will be resolved in that 30 days. Now, it's the few deals or the few mortgages that after 30 days, we either don't have a payment plan with the borrower or we don't have any correspondence that we're starting to consider in default, and we're starting to literally, take further steps to it. And so from our perspective, we consider a mortgage in default when we've escalated that mortgage from our own internal collections team, escalated that into the lawyer's team. The lawyers are now starting what is called the enforcement process. And this is the process where in Ontario, it's called power of sale. It's similar but different than what you may have heard of as the foreclosure process. And it's the legal process, the same process that any bank would use, that any private lender would use to basically list the property for sale in order to recover the funds. And so we go through that process, and we work on behalf of the investor to go through that process to remedy the default. Now, even in that process, the vast majority of mortgages pay out not from the sale of the property. Sale of the property is the sort of last resort. Not even plan B, not even plan C, probably plan, let's call it D or E. So first we're going to work with the client to remedy the payment. If that fails, we're going to work with them to refinance. If that fails, we'll ask them to see if they have any family support or if there's any other mortgage properties that they own that we can use to refinance. After that, we'll work with them, asking the borrower if they're in a position that they'd like to sell the property. Maybe it's no longer a property they can afford. We'll suggest realtors or give them the time they need to list, as long as they're providing proof that that's happening. It's only if a borrower is either unwilling or unable to do those 4 first options that we would have to follow through with the final recourse, which is power of sale.